clatter of my wife, Sarah's, gardening trowel against the stone pathway was a sound that cut through the humid Georgia evening like a shard of glass. I had just stepped out onto the porch of our cabin, a cold glass of sweet tea in my hand, the sound of cicadas buzzing their relentless rhythm in the air. The vibrant hues of the setting sun painted the sky over the lake in fiery oranges and deep purples. A beautiful, peaceful tableau that was instantly and violently shattered by the scene unfolding in our garden. Sarah was on the ground, on her knees amidst her beloved hydrangeas, her face a mask of shock and pain, clutching her arm. Looming over her were two burly men in matching navy blue polo shirts, the kind with an embroidered logo meant to convey a sense of officialdom. Emblazoned on their chests was the stylized eagle of the Lakeside Preserve Homeowners Association's Compliance Division, a self-appointed enforcement body that had been a growing source of menace in our otherwise quiet corner of the world. This is the final warning. Ma'am, the taller of the two, a man with a thick, brutish neck. I knew as Ron growled, his voice laced with a dismissive, ugly tone. These flowers are in direct violation of the community's approved planting list. They must be removed immediately. Next time there will be consequences. My blood ran cold, then hot. I moved before I even consciously made the decision. My years of training kicking in with a speed and precision honed by countless high-stakes operations. In that split second, the quiet, retired husband disappeared, replaced by the man I had been for 20 years, a decorated Navy SEAL. A warrior trained in close-quarters combat and the immediate, brutal calculus of threat assessment. What in God's name is going on here? I asked, my voice dangerously low and even. I moved swiftly to Sarah's side, helping her up, my eyes never leaving the two enforcers. I checked her quickly for injuries. A scraped knee from the fall and a rapidly purpling bruise on her forearm were immediately apparent were one of them. Had grabbed her Sarah, her usual gentle demeanor, replaced by a flash of righteous anger, clutched my hand tightly. They shoved me, John, because of the hydrangeas. Said they're unruly and don't fit their vision for the community. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes held a defiant, furious spark. The approved planting list was a recent and utterly absurd invention of the Lakeside Preserve HOA, spearheaded by its president, a retired developer named Mr. Hayes, a man obsessed with absolute order and uniformity. The list dictated everything from the species of grass on one's lawn to the types of flowers permitted in garden beds. Our small act of rebellion had been the vibrant, deep blue hydrangeas that lined our walkway, a splash of living color that brightened the entire property. They were cuttings from Sarah's grandmother's garden, a living link to her past. They were beautiful, hardy, and perfectly suited to the acidic Georgia soil. But according to Ron and his thuggish companion, a man named Gary, they were an eyesore that detracted from the harmonious visual landscape of Lakeside Preserve. Harmonious. I scoffed, my gaze hardening, shoving a woman in. Her own garden over flowers is your idea of harmony? The years melted away, and I was back in a hostile territory, assessing a direct threat to a non-combatant under my protection. The adrenaline began to pump, my senses sharpening every detail of their posture, their stance, their proximity, the way Ron shifted his weight to his back foot, the way Gary nervously flexed his hands, being analyzed and cataloged. Ron puffed out his chest, his hand instinctively going to the embroidered eagle on his shirt as if it were a real badge. We are enforcing the community regulations, sir. These rules are for the betterment of everyone. Your wife was in violation and was being uncooperative. Uncooperative? Sarah interjected, her voice rising. I told you that you were trespassing and to leave our property. You left aggressive, threatening notes. You took pictures of our garden like we were criminals, and then you put your hands on me. My grip on Sarah's hand tightened, a silent reassurance. These men had made a grave, life-altering error. They'd mistaken our quiet, reclusive nature, our desire to integrate peacefully into the landscape, for weakness. They had no idea who they were dealing with. We had moved to this cabin a year ago after my retirement from the Navy, specifically seeking refuge. I had come home from my final tour in Afghanistan 2 years prior, carrying a constellation of scars, both visible shrapnel. Wounds on my legs, and the invisible, but far deeper, wounds of post-traumatic stress disorder. After 2 decades in the teams, operating in the darkest, most chaotic corners of the world, the quiet civilian life I had left behind felt alien and hostile. Every loud, unexpected noise was a potential IED, its echo a ghost of an explosion. Every crowded room was a tactical problem with too many variables, too many potential threats. My peace was a fragile, slippery thing that I had to fight for every single day, Sarah. A brilliant and compassionate botanist was my anchor. She was the one who could talk me down from the midnight panics, the one whose quiet, steady presence could soothe the jagged edges of my memory. We decided to leave the city, to find a place where the silence was real, where the only loud noises were thunderstorms, where I could heal. This cabin was our dream. It was an old, beautiful structure on 10 acres of private wooded land, with its own small stretch of shoreline on a quiet lake. It was a pre-existing property, legally and geographically separate from the new, sprawling lakeside preserve development that had consumed the rest of the shoreline. We were not part of their HOA, a fact that our lawyer had confirmed with an ironclad title search before we ever signed the papers. We were an island, a sanctuary. The problem was, our sanctuary ruined their perfect uniform view. The HOA, led by the notoriously aggressive Mr. Hayes, could not stand the sight of our rustic, non-compliant cabin and its wild natural gardens. Our refusal to join their association, to submit to their endless rules about lawn height and mailbox color, was a personal affront to their authority. Their campaign of harassment started with the usual petty tactics. Fines for our unapproved gravel driveway. Warnings about our overgrown native plant garden, which was, in fact, Sarah's professional passion, a carefully curated collection of rare local flora. We ignored them, sending back a single, polite letter from our lawyer, explaining our property's exempt status and kindly telling them to leave us alone. When the letters failed, Hayes escalated. He had amended the HOA bylaws to create a new, 2-man compliance enforcement division. He had hired 2 thugs, Ron and Gary, men with security guard uniforms and the cold, dead eyes of bullies, to patrol the community and enforce the rules. Their primary mission, it became clear, was to make our lives a living hell, to harass and intimidate us until we either submitted and joined or sold the property to the HOA, which had made several unsolicited, insulting lowball offers. I had handled it all with the rigid, practiced calm I had learned in the service.
Ow.
I documented everything. I installed a state-of-the-art security system with multiple discrete cameras. I did not engage. To engage would be to lose the very control I fought every day to maintain. My rage, the rage I had learned to channel on the battlefield, was a beast I had to keep locked in a cage deep inside me. Sarah had pleaded with me to let the sheriff handle it, and I had agreed. Though the effort it took to not respond to their daily provocations was a physical strain, a constant grinding pressure, which brought us to today. I had been in the back, woods clearing a new walking path for Sarah, the rhythmic work a kind of therapy. The 2 enforcers had used that opportunity to trespass on our land, to confront my wife in her garden, and when she had, as we had agreed, refused to accept their final notice, the larger of the 2 had shoved her to the ground. He had put his hands on my wife. The world was still silent, still moving in a strange, syrupy slow motion. Smaller man with the clipboard, Gary, was starting to look nervous. He could see the change in me, the shift in my posture, from worried husband to something else, something he didn't recognize, but his primal instincts told him to fear. The bigger man, Ron, however, was still puffed up with the cheap, borrowed power of his uniform. "What's the matter, buddy?" he sneered, taking another step toward me. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just some coward who lets his little woman fight his battles for him?" He had crossed the invisible line, the 10-foot perimeter that my training had etched into the deepest parts of my brain. He was now a hostile combatant within my immediate sphere of influence. My body moved without any conscious thought from me, a complex machine, executing a program it had run 1,000 times before. The cage door was open. The beast was out. The sequence of events that followed took less than 5 seconds. a brutal, efficient, and utterly final ballet of controlled violence. My movements were not born of the red mist of anger, but of something far older and more deeply ingrained. Thousands of hours of hand-to-hand combat training, honed in the deadliest, most unforgiving environments on Earth. It was pure. Instinctual muscle memory, the grim and terrible art of human geometry. Ron, the big man, the one who had hit my wife, was still sneering. He was in the middle of saying something. His mouth opened to spit another taunt, when I closed the distance between us in two fluid, silent strides. His brain was still formulating a thought, while my body was already executing a solution. My left hand shot out, not in a clumsy, telegraphed punch, but with a stiff open palm, the heel of my hand striking the base of his nose. The technique is not about power. It's about hydraulic shock, a precise jolt that travels directly up the cartilaginous septum to the brainstem, causing a momentary system-wide shutdown of the central nervous system. His eyes went wide with a look of pure, uncomprehending shock as his world went instantly dark. Before his massive body had even begun its slow, crumpling fall to the grass, I was already pivoting, my focus shifting to the second threat, the smaller man with the clipboard. Gary was just beginning to register what was happening. His mouth was open in a silent O of abject terror. He made a fatal mistake. He dropped his clipboard and tried to turn and run. His panic made him slow and clumsy. I caught the collar of his polo shirt, using his own forward momentum to spin him around and slam him face first into the thick, an unforgiving trunk of a nearby oak tree. There was a sickening wet crunch as his nose and cheekbone broke against the rough bark. He slid to the ground in a heap, a whimpering, bloody mess, the clipboard in its meaningless violation. Notices scattering in the grass around him like fallen leaves. The silence that rushed back in was absolute, profound, was broken only by the whimpering of the man by the tree and the ragged, harsh sound of my own breathing. I stood between the two crumpled forms, my body still coiled, my senses on high alert, my head on a swivel, scanning for other threats as my training dictated, but there were none. The battle was over. It was Sarah's voice that brought me back from that cold, hard place. "John," she whispered, her voice hoarse and shaky. She was on her feet now, her hands still pressed to her chest where the bruise was already starting to form, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid for me, afraid of the place in his own mind that she knew I had just been forced to go. I turned to her, and the cold, hard mask of the soldier fell away, replaced by the panicked, desperate face of a husband. I rushed to her side, my hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her, afraid that the same hands that had just wrought such efficient destruction might somehow break her. "Are you okay?" "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry you had to see that." "Okay," she said, her voice shaky but firm as she took my trembling hand in hers. "He just knocked the wind out of me." "John, what did you do?" "I kept a promise," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I told you I would never let anyone hurt you. Now go inside, lock the doors, and call 911. Tell them your husband has been assaulted by two men on your property, that you require police and an ambulance immediately." She understood immediately. She was a calm head in a crisis. The narrative had to be clear, precise, and truthful. They were the aggressors. They were the ones who had trespassed and initiated the physical contact. My response, however brutal, had been a reaction, a defense of my wife and my home. The arrival of the sheriff's deputies was a scene of controlled, surreal calm. They found me sitting on my porch steps, my hands resting openly on my knees, my breathing even and slow. They found Sarah inside, a bag of frozen peas pressed to her rapidly bruising chest. And they found the two compliance enforcers exactly where they had fallen. The big one was just beginning to stir, a low, piteous groan escaping his lips. The smaller one was sobbing quietly into a patch of moss. I explained what had happened in a calm, flat, declarative monotone, the same way I would have delivered an after-action report to a commanding officer. I detailed the months of harassment, I explained that the two men had trespassed on our posted property. I explained that they had verbally and then physically assaulted my wife. I explained that I had then acted to defend her from the ongoing assault. The big man, now conscious and belligerent, tried to spin his own story from the back of the ambulance. "He's a maniac," he yelled, his voice thick from his broken nose. We were just serving a notice, and he attacked us. Out of nowhere? For no reason? The evidence was hard to argue with. There was the rapidly forming hand-shaped bruise on my wife's chest. There were the scattered HOA notices on the grass, proof that this was not a random encounter. And there was my own state-of-the-art security camera footage, which I had calmly downloaded to my tablet and now was presented to the lead deputy. The footage was high definition and undeniable. It showed the two men walking onto our property, past the clearly visible no trespassing signs. It showed them confronting Sarah in her garden. It showed the big man Ron shouting, then striking her with the back of his hand with vicious force. And it showed me coming around the woodshed and neutralizing the two of them in a blur of motion that lasted less than 5 seconds. The lead deputy, veteran officer with tired eyes, watched the footage, his face grim. He had seen enough. 2 enforcers were handcuffed and after being treated at the hospital, booked into the county jail. They were charged with trespassing, assault, and battery. The fallout for the Lakeside Preserve HOA was catastrophic. When the story came out, when it was revealed that their president, Mr. Hayes, hired 2 thugs with criminal records to act as his private army, and that they had assaulted a woman on her own property. The community erupted in fury and lawsuits. Hayes was immediately removed as president. The HOA's insurance carrier dropped them instantly, citing the hiring of unlicensed and unbonded security personnel who had committed felonies while on the job. They were facing a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit from us, and dozens more from their own residents, whose property values were now plummeting due to the scandal. A week later, our lawyer informed us that the HOA had agreed to settle. They offered us a 7-figure sum, a formal public apology to be printed in the local paper, and a legally binding covenant to be filed with the county that acknowledged our property's sovereign status and created a permanent 50-foot no-contact buffer zone around our land. We accepted. That evening, I was sitting on the dock with Sarah, watching the sunset paint the lake in fiery strokes of orange and gold. The bruise on her chest had faded to a sickly yellow-green, but the fear in her eyes from that day was finally, blessedly gone. The silence of the lake was no longer a fragile thing I had to fight to protect. It was ours again, solid and real. "You know," she said softly, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I've never seen that part of you before, not really." "I hope you never have to see it again," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I keep it locked away for a reason." "I know," she whispered, her hand finding mine in the twilight, "but I'm glad it's there. I'm glad it's on my side." I looked out across the dark, still water. The beast was back in its cage. The storm was over, and my world was quiet again. The price of our peace had been a few seconds of terrible violence, a brief, bloody reminder that the only way to truly defeat a bully is to meet their aggression with an absolute, unyielding, and overwhelming finality. They had made the fatal mistake of breaking their petty rules in a place where I had once been the master of a much deadlier game.